All right, well, hello everyone. I am very glad to have the opportunity to chat with you today. So I come from a family of teachers. My mom is a teacher, my dad was an attorney and a teacher, my sister's a teacher, my uncle's a teacher. I'm a marketer, but I love teaching. And so really my goal for this session is to just share some very practical, actionable tips. So if you want to leave here with some ideas on how do you actually take ABM into your organization, hopefully you'll come out of the session with that. The focus is on ABM in a downturn, so I'll talk a little bit about that as a setup, then we'll get into the meat of the conversation. A little bit more about me. As you heard, I was one of the co-founders, am one of the co-founders of Marketo, the first chief marketing officer over there. And it was the experience of growing Marketo, starting with traditional demand gen, but over time trying to move up market into target accounts, that sort of got me doing ABM, learning you can't really do it with just marketing automation. And that's what inspired me to leave in 2015, and I founded a company called Engagio, which was one of the early ABM platforms as well. And then in 2020, we brought Engagio and DemandBase together to create really the new DemandBase. Little mini pitch, if you haven't seen DemandBase in the last 2 years, you haven't seen DemandBase. So I encourage you to kind of check out what the new DemandBase is all about. In addition to being a marketer, I am a dad. These are my 2 kids. Another just little quick fun fact about me is I studied physics for my undergrad degree. So my hand was up when Bev was asking about fractals and what 20% and 20% is and things like that. And so you combine sort of the nerd in me with the dad in me. I love nerdy dad jokes. So we're going to have a bunch of these interspersed throughout today's presentation. So for example, 2 atoms were walking down the street when one yelled out to the other, "Oh no, I think I lost an electron." "Really?" the other one replied. "Are you sure?" Can you guess what the answer is? Yep, I'm absolutely positive. All right. Hopefully you all get some of these. If anybody doesn't get the jokes, find me afterwards. I'll happy to explain them. Okay, so ABM in a downturn. I want to talk about this with kind of almost an evolutionary perspective. Because think about, a long time ago, the big dinosaurs ruled the earth. In some ways, that's an analogy for the world I think we've been living in for the past 5 years or so, really, when ABM came into its own. The big dinosaurs, and the analogy here is it's the big companies, the hyper-growth ones with lots of valuation, and spending a lot of money and trying to grow really, really fast, and so on. And I think that's the world we were in, where the investors rewarded that kind of big investment, hyper-growth kind of approach to the world. But for the dinosaurs, that obviously changed. A meteor came along and created a new environment. And we're experiencing the same thing. In our case, the first meteor that came is COVID. Now, so much money got injected into the economy during COVID, in some ways it actually exacerbated the issues of leaning into hypergrowth and overinvestment and things like that. But then sort of the second meteor impact of inflation's come along, right? 8.8% inflation here in the UK. And that's driving us towards a downturn. Like, we can debate, we're not really in a recession yet, we're still seeing some growth, but we know the central banks are going to do everything they can do to tamp down that inflation, even if it means dramatically or slowing down the economy. So after the meteor hit, right, what happened, right? The big dinosaurs died out, and a new set of species started to really thrive and emerge, and those were the mammals. Right, the little tiny mammals. And what made the mammals more survivable during that time? They were smaller, they were more flexible, they were more adaptable. And I think we're going to see the same thing happening here in companies, right? HBR did some research during the last downturn about how companies fared. What they found was 17% of companies died. They just went out of business. They did not survive the downturn. The vast majority of companies kind of middled along. They didn't die, but they certainly didn't thrive. And then 9% of companies came out of the downturn stronger, right? And they looked at these 9%, and what was the common theme across these 9 companies? They did 2 things. One, they did prudently reduce costs. They found savings. And as marketers, we're probably feeling that ourselves right now. I wouldn't be surprised if most of you, or when you're thinking about 23 budgets, are facing either flat or down budgets. And yet these companies that thrived also found ways to prudently and efficiently grow, much like the mammals did. And hopefully, probably you're seeing that as well yourself. You still have growth targets for next year, you just don't have more budget to do it. So that's the world we're facing. How do I do more with less? Now, you could work harder, but I don't know about your team. If I look at my team, they're already working pretty darn hard. And I can't really kind of ask them to work harder. So if you can't work harder, what's the answer? You work smarter. And working smarter is really in many ways about being more focused, being more efficient. To Bev's point earlier, if you can invest more resources into the 20% of the most profitable accounts, you're by definition going to be more efficient over time. So that's really what I want to talk about in this presentation. How do you work smarter? And one of the themes that I hope you'll take out of this is I believe that all right, sidebar. Don't let the AV people take your Google Slides and turn them into PowerPoints, because then you get weird things up on the top. So I apologize for the small headline and things like that, and the font being wrong. So, but the account intelligence, is how you work smarter. And so the roadmap for the rest of this presentation is first I'm going to talk a little bit more about account intelligence and what is it. And then I'm going to then talk about how do you take that account intelligence and actually use it in your account-based programs. And I'll be using what I call the demand-based secret sauce. More than anything else, how am I doing that? How's my own company doing it? So it can be very practical, actionable tips. But first, another dad joke. So the sheepdog chased all the sheep into the pen, and this sheepdog can talk, so he told the farmer, all 40 accounted for. The farmer's confused, though. He said, but I only have 36 sheep. And the sheepdog said, I know, but I rounded them up. All right. I gotta say, you guys are chuckling at these more than the US audiences do, so that's a good thing. All right, how do you build your account intelligence? So account intelligence starts with your first-party data. There's a lot of information about your accounts that's kind of trapped in your CRM, your marketing automation system, the people visiting your website anonymously, even your email, your Outlook or your Google servers with the meetings and the emails that are going on. So that all tends to be disconnected. So step one is bring it all together. Get it into kind of a usable common view of the account. Clean it if necessary, because a lot of times the data is a little old or dirty, and match it and that kind of thing. But then increasingly what we're finding is that true account intelligence is then all about augmenting that first-party data with really quality, accurate third-party data across companies and hierarchies and contacts and accounts, intent and things like that. So I'm going to just kind of walk through some of my pieces of these different elements of account intelligence. Quick sidebar. A lot of today's presentation probably skews a little bit more into the more scale-oriented types of ABM, one to few, one to many, as you'll see in a minute, even kind of talking about targeted demand generation. So there's obviously custom account research you can do in account plans and that kind of thing, which would be another form of sort of almost zero-party data. I'm really focusing here more on kind of the types of data you can get at scale. So it starts with company and contact information, and this is really just things like size, industry, location, as well as for people, their name, their title, their mobile phone number. Hierarchy information tends to be very important for ABM, so knowing that ESPN is a division of Disney and how different divisions relate to each other is an example of this. And you're going to use it to find and score accounts, build territories, identify the right people to talk to at these accounts. Now, vendors, including DemandBase, we're going to tell you how proud we are. We've got 30 million companies in Europe and 30 million contacts with mobile phone numbers and that kind of thing. That said, when evaluating vendors here, my semi-biased opinion, is to look at accuracy, not just volume, right? Does that vendor have the right contact information for the people and the companies that you actually care about? So next, account identification, de-anonymization. There's a lot of companies visiting your website. There's companies visiting other websites. They're usually anonymous. 98% of the people on your website are not cookied by your marketing automation, totally unknown, blind to you, unless you can de-anonymize that traffic. Historically, that's been done with IP addresses and kind of reverse IP mapping. When COVID happened and we all started working from home, that IP addresses became less valuable. State of the art today combines IP addresses and cookies. Cookies might go away someday, in which case there'll be other replacements, as well as the IP address kind of still matters. But the key here ultimately is to de-anonymize web traffic. For this one, I encourage you to think about not just match rate, but accuracy. A lot of people talk about match rate. What percentage of my traffic can you identify? Now, I could tell you 100% of the people visiting your website work at IBM. That would be 100% match rate, right? It just wouldn't be very accurate. So really think about the trade-off of match versus accuracy when sort of evaluating these kinds of vendors. Technographics. So technographics is what technologies does that company own? Now, this is not as relevant for every company, but what we find with our predictive models is that for other technology companies, this is the #1 predictor of account fit. It's true for me at DemandBase, right? I really care what CRM you're on, what marketing automation are you on? Do you use a sales engagement tool? Do you have another ABM solution, et cetera? One of the coolest things you can do with technographics is find patterns. Companies tend to buy technologies in certain orders. They buy CRM, then they buy marketing automation, then they buy account-based marketing. And we can sort of find those patterns and in some cases tell you, hey, we think this company's probably ready for this next technology. The most sophisticated version of this is contract renewal dates. You know what? We just saw that technology show up for the first time 10 months ago. Might be up for renewal. Might be a good time to kind of reach out. The key thing to think about here when evaluating vendors is the number of technologies they have, accuracy. Some technologies are easy to find, right? You can tell if somebody uses Demandbase because you can see our code on the website. It's almost public information. Other technologies are much harder to find because they don't have that. They're behind the firewall. We have to do things like mining job postings and message boards to see what technologies they're talking about. So the last type of data I want to talk about is intent. You would be living under a rock for the last 5 years if you haven't heard about intent data. What it's all about is just tracking the content companies are looking at so that you can kind of identify who's interested, who's in market, and that kind of thing. Somebody at dinner asked me last night, like, hey, is intent data like this magic? How accurate is intent data? And the honest truth is, intent data is really cool, but just remember, it's just one signal, right? It's a signal that, hey, people at that company are researching this thing more than they were yesterday, right? Does that mean like, oh my God, alarm's going off, like you have to surround that account and pound them until they submit? No, right? It's a signal. It's a useful signal. Now, here's the other thing about intent data. Let me first of all demystify where it comes from. Every intent data vendor, whether it's Demandbase or Bombora or G2, follows roughly the same algorithm. They've got a person on a web page. And the person, all you really know is their cookie and their IP address. So the first thing you need to do, regardless of the vendor, is to de-anonymize, which I talked about just a minute ago. Hey, this person's IBM, this person's Tesla. Then you can do natural language processing on the content of the page to see what that page is about. Then what you do is you start to find patterns. Just one person reading just one article doesn't really tell you much. But if you've got 7 people from a company reading an article, that starts to tell you, hey, that account maybe is kind of interested in that topic. And then you can look at changes. So if you see a spike or a jump, that can be an indication of change. Now, the thing about intent data is every vendor, even though we're following roughly the same algorithm, person on page, we're all mining different pages, different sets of data. Demandbase, we're getting ours off of a B2B bid stream. Bombora gets theirs off of the Madison Logic Network. G2 gets it off of their own site, right? What this means that is actually intent data vendors are very complementary. We're all getting different signal, so you can have one that's showing intent and another one that isn't. That doesn't mean one's right or wrong. It just means we're mining different signals. Okay. That was kind of account intelligence 101. First-party data, cleaned, matched, and then augmented with third-party data. And as you'll see in a minute, make sense of it with AI. So now let's get into the practical tips. How do you use this in your ABM programs? But as always, first, a dad joke before we get into the next one. This one's a little less mathy. Did you hear about the lawyer who sued the airline for misplacing his luggage? He lost his case. Wow, that was like a delayed second wave there. I like that one. Okay, applying account intelligence to ABM to work smarter in Downturn. And this is really going to be all about the demand-based secret sauce. Well, there's a little secret sauce bottle you'll see on some of my slides to kind of indicate that. And with the time I have, I'm going to really focus on three main pieces. One, finding the accounts that are really worth your investment and prioritizing them. All about the pyramid Bev showed earlier. Focusing your investment dollars onto those right accounts and the right people at those accounts. And then engaging with intelligence across the account journey. The goals ultimately are sales and marketing alignment, spotting opportunities earlier, and then closing them more efficiently. Again, admitting to a little bit of a bias towards one-to-few, one-to-many scale-oriented pieces of ABM. So first, finding the right accounts worth your investment. So in most cases, the number of accounts that you could pursue at any given time will almost always be larger than the number that you actually can pursue, right? And again, talking about one-to-few, one-to-many. And as a result of that, when you're not focused on the right ones at the right time, there's inefficiency. Your sales teams and your SDRs, if you have those, spend a lot of time just trying to figure out where do I focus? What do I do next? Your competitors often get into the accounts before you, right? Because you didn't know that you should reach out, and your whole engine gets kind of less efficient at every stage, not just pipeline, because it frankly doesn't have the best stuff prioritized at the top. So how do we solve this? We solve it more than anything else by, I think, investing, like using intelligence to find the right accounts, but as Bev talked about, tiering our efforts. So the more valuable the account, the more effort it gets. There's a really, really important point here that came up at dinner last night also. I talked to a lot of marketers, and I bet many of you in this room think this way, that think it's either ABM or demand generation, and that somehow this is like a black or white thing. I don't think that's the right way to think about this. The way I think about it is just you have a go-to-market, right? You have the way your business works, and there's going to be a spectrum of styles, and you might have one-to-one for deals worth more than £1 million a year. 2 million pounds a year. You might have a one-to-few. You might have a one-to-many. You might have these others. The key is to sort of define what that means for your business, across the entire spectrum. And the way I think that the best practice I've seen to do that starts with defining what I call your entitlements. The mistake is picking the accounts first. Well, these are going to be our 30 tier 1s, and these are going to be our 200 tier 2s. When you don't even know what it means to be a tier 1 or a tier 2 or a tier 3. So start by writing down the entitlements. Say, if we're going to have a tier 1 account, right? Well, we're going to buy this data. We're going to invest this much on advertising. We're going to send this kind of direct mail and gifting. We're going to high value offers. These are things like meetings with your executives, invitations to fancy dinners or private experiences. We're going to have this kind of account plan. Our SDRs are going to follow up this quickly. You can kind of read the slide. One specific kind of entitlement is triggered entitlements. For example, demand-based entitlement we have is if a tier 1 or tier 2 account has a new CMO, then we're going to take these actions. So define tier 1, tier 2, tier 3, tier 4. Document that with your sales team. This becomes your contract for your go-to-market. so that nobody can ever doubt, like, what does it mean to be a tier 1, tier 2, tier 3 account? We did this, when we did this on Demandbase, it was enlightening because a lot of salespeople didn't necessarily even know what it meant when we said, hey, what's a tier 3 account? The other advantage of defining your entitlements is it tends to tell you then how many accounts you can have in each tier. And that's why I think you should start with entitlements, right? If you know you're going to do this, 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 this in tier 1, you might realize, wow, I can only support 5 of those. For example, or at Demandbase, because we're a little bit more scale, for us it's 5 per account exec. We can have 30 tier 2s per exec, 100 tier 3s per account exec. And then all the other accounts that are still good fits for us, we call into a tier 4, or ICP. Once this is defined, I would say now you're finally ready. Oh, sorry, before I get to that, this is a new slide of my deck. This is what Demandbase's entitlements look like. And I don't expect you can read the slide. But if you'd like a copy of this, of our entitlements, just either DM me on LinkedIn is probably the best way to do it, and I will happily share this with you. So now you're finally ready to pick your target accounts. And I really think that this is a process that should be what I call marketing-driven but sales-selected. A big mistake I've seen companies make, including demand-based customers, is they take all this, marketing takes all this account intelligence that we can deliver, and then basically says, here's the target accounts, and then you don't necessarily have sales as buy-in, right? And then to Bev's point earlier, then you're not all looking at the same pyramids, right? So when the salespeople pick the accounts, that's driving sales and marketing alignment. They're bought in. They know what it means to be a tier 2, and they've selected their tier 2s. But don't let them go all willy-nilly and random, right? Marketing should drive the process. And you can drive the process with the account intelligence. So this is literally how we do at Demandbase. We give each rep a spreadsheet that has the accounts in their territory because we know what those are. We know their firmographics. We know some key scores that I'll talk about in a minute. And then the rep goes in and they say, okay, these are my tier 1s, these are my tier 2s, these are my tier 3s. So marketing is guiding the process, but sales is picking and owning the accounts. I think that's really, really key for alignment. Okay, time's flying, moving on. Dad joke time. This one's pretty short. Did you hear about the man who signed up for only one dating platform? He found love at first sight. Didn't have quite the second delay as the lawyer one. All right, so now we're focusing our investment on these best accounts that we've identified. And I want to, just in the spirit of time, really just talk about advertising as kind of this section. And I will admit, I used to be an advertising skeptic when it came to ABM. I'd tried using it at Engagio and didn't see great results. And what I've come to learn is that not all advertising platforms are equal. Most advertising platforms are using either AppNexus or the Trade Desk. AppNexus is now called Xandr, actually, which are DSPs, demand-side platforms, that were built for consumer marketing. Literally, they're built to help people sell boots. You shop for boots, you start seeing ads for boots all over the place. They're not built for some unique elements of B2B. So what is special about B2B advertising? Well, the first piece comes back to that account of de-anonymization. Somebody's on CNN.com, right? Well, do you want to show an ad to that account? So go ahead. Well, all right, well, that's Walmart and that's Land's End. Maybe those are 2 accounts that you're targeting. But that's where it gets a little bit more, now is where it gets a little bit more tricky, because you have to optimize across the accounts. If your DSP is not account aware, what that means is it doesn't know you've shown an impression to somebody that account already or not, right? And as a result, the number of impressions each account gets will tend to be proportional to the number of employees at that account. Hopefully that makes sense. But Land's End has 5,000 employees. Walmart has 100,000 employees. You might want them to get more impressions, but you don't necessarily want them to get 20 times the number of impressions. We call those super suckers, and we see them in campaigns all the time. Where when we have run side-by-side campaigns, let me look at my numbers here, 85% of the impressions using a B2C DSP went to the top 10% accounts, and therefore only 4% of the accounts actually clicked, through to the site. Whereas with B2B DSP, you can get it much more distributed across the account so that, basically almost a third of accounts will click. So that's the super sucker problem. The other thing you want to do with B2B that's unique is you want to get your ads in front of the right people at those accounts. Now, one way you can do that is with title targeting or known contact targeting. If you have these people in your database, you can onboard that data and try to show your ads to those specific people, which is great, but just because usually you have B2B identities, like I'm J Miller at DemandBase, not Jon Miller 2 at Gmail, in your database, it doesn't always match to the consumer cookies. So you only get about a 30% match when you onboard your known contacts. What we find works really, really well is what we call intent-based bidding, which is somebody's on New York Times, and we don't know who that specific person is. We know they work at Walmart, but we also know that's the person who was researching ABM, on another article yesterday because of their cookie. So we call that high intent bidding, when it's the person who is showing interest in your category. And when we see that, we get 7 times the amount of engagement versus an average cookie. Okay, onward to the last topic. But first, a dad joke. Why do teenagers travel in groups of 3s and 5s? I have a teenager. It's because they can't even. All right, so last topic is how do we actually engage these accounts with intelligence? And intelligent engagement starts with FIRE. This is one of my favorite acronyms. You saw it briefly on the spreadsheet a minute ago. So the F in FIRE stands for fit. Is this an account something that I'm interested in because of their size, their industry, the technologies they use, all that kind of stuff. The I stands for intent. We've talked about that. Are they showing intent? R is relationship. Do I have history or context with this account? Maybe we sold to them, that they were a customer at a prior company. Maybe we had an open opportunity with them last year that just got deferred, that kind of thing. And then the E stands for engagement. This is, are they spending time with you? Do they open your emails, download your content, come to your events, and so on? You can actually combine all these using AI, something we call Pipeline Predict. Pipeline Predict is looking at your opportunities that actually, or accounts that become opportunities, and what are the patterns of behaviors they tend to show before they become an opportunity, and look for other accounts showing similar patterns. You can then take all this and then map it to an account journey. And I'll just take a quick picture of this slide, but more importantly then is the next slide, which is, so this is the demand-based account journey, i.e. what we use internally for our own go-to-market. You can and should customize these stages to match your business. Don't rely on kind of an out-of-the-box, black box to sort of say, hey, these are where accounts are. Because you want it to be clear and transparent to your salespeople why an account is in a given stage. So for us, qualified, these are the accounts that have good fit. We're interested in them, even though they don't know anything about us yet. Aware means they're showing intent, so the F, the I. Engage means now they're starting to come to our website, downloading our content, but they're not yet kind of hand raisers yet. MQA, this stands for Marketing Qualified Account. These are the ones, it's a play on the classic MQL. These are the ones that we think, these are hot. We really need to be kind of in touch with these. Opportunity, customer, post-sale, these are all stages kind of in our go-to-market. Now, here's the key point. If you sort of take anything away from this, what we find is these journey stages are the most important segmentation attribute for any campaign in order to be relevant to the account. So we work really hard to match our go-to-market to where they are. If an account is in that qualified stage, we're interested in them, they're not interested in us, I'm just building my brand. This is about emotion, not logic, right? Just so like I'm getting some consideration for when they actually may be interested. As they move to aware or engaged, this is when we're going to move from emotion to logic, more thought leadership, best practices, but again, not kind of knocking on their door. MQA is now where we're going to get really orchestrated and try to surround that account and reach out because we think they're in market, they're interested. We continue to market even when they're an opportunity. there's a big buying committee, 21 people, that the salesperson can't possibly be talking to all of them. How do we drive consensus and validation across the buyer's journey? And then even for our customers, we drive expansion and adoption with kind of ongoing messages. Now, I'm showing ads here because digital advertising is part of it, but these are really orchestrated messages that apply through our nurturing, our direct mail, kind of everything that we're doing. So it's all about using that account intelligence to know where the account is and then aligning our message appropriately. Okay, oh gosh, last point I don't have a ton of time to get into. A key part of orchestration is how marketing and sales work and work together. The analogy here is rather than the traditional lead baton handoff, like a relay race, it looks much better like a football team, where you've got marketing and sales working together. You've got players in different positions, but you're ultimately working together. And the key implication of this is how you measure. You know, I would encourage you, anybody who's thinking about ABM, to throw away the concept of marketing sourced or marketing influenced pipeline. Right? It doesn't work in a team-based scenario. What works in a team-based scenario is you scored a goal together. You know, the team scored a goal. Happy to talk more about that to anybody who's interested. But that's kind of near the end here. So one last dad joke. Although this is a twofer. Many of you have heard this one. Why is 6 afraid of 7? Because 7, 8, 9. But do you know why 7, 8, 9? Right? Well, that's because you're supposed to eat 3 squared meals a day. All right, listen, if this was helpful to you, if you found this somewhat educational, I have a book. As I said, I'm a teacher. I wrote a book. It's 260 pages, full of practical advice and best practices. You can get it digitally at demandbase.com. If you want a printed copy, come by our booth and have them write down your name, and I think we should be able to send one to you. I do recommend it, though. It's a good book. Give it to your teams. And these are my key takeaways for ABM in a downturn. I don't think we have time for kind of public Q&A, but I would be happy to consider, let everybody else go to break and hang around for anybody who has questions.
We'd love loads of questions for you, but we are out of time. So John, thank you so much. It's wonderful to hear.